Child Protection Services knocked on my door and told me my son had touched his sister. There are moments in life that break you in two, moments that divide your existence into a before and an after, so brutal that you never again are the same person. On the 23rd of March, 2023, at 7:42 in the morning, my entire world crumbled with 3 sharp knocks on my front door. I was in the kitchen, making breakfast like any other Thursday. The smell of freshly brewed coffee filled the air, and through the window came that golden dawn light that had always seemed comforting to me. My husband Daniel had already left for work 20 minutes earlier. The children were still sleeping, Sebastian, 14 years old, in his room on the 2nd floor, and Valentina, my little 8-year-old girl, in hers, right next door. Everything seemed normal. Everything seemed peaceful. And then, those 3 knocks. They were not normal knocks. They were not the knocks of a neighbor asking for sugar or a delivery person dropping off a package. They were knocks that echoed through the entire house, knocks that carried something dark within them, something my maternal instinct recognized before my mind could process it. I walked to the door with my heart pounding in my throat. Through the frosted glass I could make out 2 silhouettes, a woman and a man, both dressed formally. When I opened it, the woman stepped forward. She had her hair pulled back in a tight bun, black framed glasses, and in her hand she held a folder that, without my yet knowing, contained the words that would destroy everything I thought I knew about my family. "Good morning. Are you Mrs. Camila Herrera de Mendoza?" she asked, in a voice that tried to sound neutral but exuded a professional coldness that froze my blood. "Yes, that's me," I replied, gripping the edge of my cotton robe as if it were a shield. "I am Licenciada Patricia Vega, from the Department of Child Protection, and this is my colleague, Licenciado Roberto Almanza. May we come in? We need to speak with you about an urgent matter concerning your children." My children. Those 2 words hit me like a punch to the stomach. I opened the door completely and let them in, leading them to the living room where just 24 hours earlier, we had been watching a family movie, eating popcorn, and laughing at Sebastian's silly jokes. They sat on the beige sofa that Daniel and I had bought when we moved into this house 10 years ago, when we were still a young couple full of dreams, when Sebastian was only 4 years old, and Valentina didn't even exist in our plans. Licenciada Vega opened her folder and looked directly into my eyes. At that moment, time stopped. I remember every detail with a terrifying clarity, the sound of the wall clock marking the seconds, the aroma of coffee cooling in the kitchen, the patch of sunlight falling on the carpet forming a perfect rectangle. "Mrs. Mendoza," she began, and her voice sounded like the prelude to an earthquake. "Yesterday afternoon we received a report from the elementary school where your daughter Valentina attends. One of the teachers noticed unusual behavior in the girl during physical education class, and after a private conversation, Valentina revealed very concerning information." My heart stopped beating for a second. Perhaps 2. "What kind of information?" I asked, and my voice sounded strange, as if coming from far away, as if it belonged to someone else. The licenciada exchanged a look with her colleague before continuing. "Mrs. Mendoza, your daughter stated that her brother Sebastian has had inappropriate physical contact with her on multiple occasions over the past several months." The words fell on me like blocks of concrete. I felt the floor opening beneath my feet, the walls of my house closing in, the air becoming thick and unbreathable. My mind refused to process what I had just heard. It was impossible. It was absolutely impossible. "That can't be true," I said, and my voice cracked on the last word. "Sebastian would never do such a thing. He loves his sister. He protects her. They are siblings. We understand this is extremely difficult to absorb." Licenciado Almanza intervened for the first time, with a tone that pretended to be compassionate, but to me sounded like a death sentence. "But we have a legal obligation to investigate all reports of this nature. We need to speak with both children separately, and we will also need you to provide information about the family dynamics." Everything that came after that moment is a blur of tears, questions, forms, and accusatory looks. I called Daniel, who arrived in less than 15 minutes with a disfigured face and eyes filled with a confusion that reflected exactly what I felt. The social workers first spoke with Valentina in her room while we waited in the living room, holding hands like 2 castaways in the middle of a storm. Then they went upstairs to wake Sebastian. I will never forget my son's face when he came down the stairs escorted by the two officials. His hair was tousled from sleep, his eyes swollen, and he had an expression of absolute terror that broke my soul. He looked at me seeking explanations, seeking protection, and I could give him neither. "Mom, what's going on?" he asked, and his voice sounded so small, so vulnerable, so different from the voice of the teenager who thought he was invincible. I couldn't answer him. Words stuck in my throat like stones. Daniel took a step towards him, but Licenciado Almanza raised a hand. "Sebastian, we need to ask you some questions. Your parents will wait here." And they took him to the kitchen, to that space where we had so often shared laughter and conversations, where I had taught him how to make his first birthday cake, where I had healed his scraped knees with kisses and cartoon band-aids. The next 45 minutes were the longest of my life. Daniel paced back and forth in the living room like a caged animal, muttering incoherent phrases about lawyers and rights, and how this all had to be a misunderstanding. I remained seated on the sofa, motionless, feeling how each passing second ripped away a piece of the life I knew. When the officials finally came down with Sebastian, the expression on my son's face had changed. There was no longer fear. There was something worse. There was shame. A shame so deep, so devastating, that it seemed to have aged him 10 years in less than an hour. "Mr. and Mrs. Mendoza," said Licenciada Vega, consulting her notes, "based on the interviews conducted, we have determined there is sufficient evidence to open a formal investigation. Sebastian has admitted to having physical contact with his sister that can be classified as inappropriate." The world stopped turning. Daniel collapsed into the armchair as if he had been shot. I felt like I would vomit, faint, die right there in my own living room. I looked at my son, at that boy I had carried in my arms, who I had fed from my breast, who had been my first love, my first everything, and I didn't recognize him. "Sebastian," I whispered, and his name sounded like a broken prayer. He didn't look at me. He kept his eyes fixed on the floor, with his fists clenched at his sides, trembling like a leaf in an autumn storm. "You will have to appear tomorrow at our offices for a more detailed evaluation," continued the licenciata, handing Daniel a card. "In the meantime, and as protocol, we strongly recommend that Sebastian not have unsupervised contact with Valentina. We understand this is difficult, but it is a necessary protective measure." I don't remember how they left. I don't remember if I opened the door for them or if they left on their own. The only thing I remember is the silence that remained afterward. A silence so dense it seemed to have its own weight, a silence that threatened to suffocate us all. Daniel was the first to speak. "Sebastian," he said, and his voice sounded like the growl of a wounded animal. "What the hell did you do?" "Daniel, wait." I tried to intervene, but my husband ignored me. "Answer me," he shouted, moving towards our son with a fury I had never seen in him. "What did you do to your sister?" Sebastian finally looked up, and what I saw in his eyes destroyed me completely. There were tears, yes, but there was also something else. There was guilt, a guilt so immense, so overwhelming, that confirmed my worst fears. "I didn't want to," he stammered, and tears began to fall down his cheeks. "I don't know what happened, Dad. I just was confused and—" Daniel raised his hand. For a second that lasted an eternity, I thought he would hit him. I thought my husband, the kind and patient man I had known for 16 years, would strike our son, but at the last moment his hand stopped in the air and fell to his side, defeated. "Go to your room," he said with a voice I didn't recognize. "Now." Sebastian ran up the stairs, and the sound of his bedroom door closing echoed through the entire house like a gunshot. I was left alone with Daniel in the living room, surrounded by the remnants of the life we thought we had. He collapsed onto the sofa and buried his face in his hands. I slowly approached, not knowing if I should touch him, not knowing what to say, not knowing anything at all. "How did we not notice?" he murmured, and his voice sounded so small, so lost. "Camila, how did we not see the signs?" It was a question I would ask myself thousands of times in the following days, weeks, and months. A question that would rob me of sleep, that would make me question every decision I had made as a mother, that would make me obsessively review every moment of the last few years searching for clues I should have seen. But at that moment I had no answers. I only had pain. The days that followed were a hell of bureaucratic procedures, psychological evaluations, and disapproving looks from professionals who seemed to judge us with every question. Valentina was interviewed by a child psychologist specializing in abuse cases, a woman with graying hair and kind eyes who explained to us that the process would be long and delicate. "The most important thing now is your daughter's emotional safety," she told us in a private meeting. "Valentina needs to feel heard, protected, and above all, not guilty." Many children in her situation develop feelings of guilt because they believe they somehow caused what happened to them. Those words shattered me. The idea that my little girl, my baby, could be blaming herself for something that was not her responsibility was unbearable to me. Daniel and I barely spoke. The tension between us was an invisible but impenetrable wall. He slept in the guest room, claiming he needed space to process. But I knew the truth was more complex. We blamed each other without saying it out loud. Every look we exchanged was loaded with silent accusations. Why weren't you more present? Why didn't you supervise better? How did you not notice? Sebastian spent his days locked in his room, coming out only for meals he barely touched, and for mandatory appointments with the psychologist assigned to him. He had temporarily stopped going to school, a decision we made to avoid the rumors that would inevitably arise. In a small town like ours, secrets don't last long. One night, approximately 2 weeks after our life had fallen apart, I mustered the courage to enter my son's room. I had gone nights without sleeping, plagued by questions I needed to ask, but was afraid to formulate. I needed to understand. I needed to hear from his own lips what had happened. I gently knocked on the door. "Sebastian, can I come in?" A long silence preceded his response. "Yes." I opened the door and found him sitting on the edge of the bed, looking out the window at the darkness of the garden. His room, which before was a chaos of rock band posters, science fiction books, and clothes thrown everywhere, was now arranged in an almost obsessive manner. It was as if he had tried to control something, anything, in the midst of all the chaos. I sat down beside him without saying anything. The silence between us was heavy, but strangely not uncomfortable. It was the silence of two people who have lost their words, who no longer know how to communicate. "I know you hate me," he finally said, without looking at me. "I don't hate you," I replied, and I was surprised to discover it was true. "I'm confused. I'm scared. I'm devastated, but I don't hate you. You are my son." He turned his head to look at me, and in his eyes I saw the boy he once was. The boy who ran to me after school with drawings he had made in class. The boy who asked me to sing him songs before bed. The boy who told me I was the best mom in the whole wide world. "Mom, I didn't want to hurt Vale," he said, and his voice broke. "I swear I didn't. She's my sister. I love her. But I was confused. I was seeing things on the internet, things that made me feel weird things, and I had no one to talk to. I felt my heart break into 1,000 pieces, but I also felt something else, a deep rage, not towards my son, but towards myself, towards Daniel, towards the world that had allowed a 14-year-old boy to navigate the murky waters of sexuality without any guidance or protection. "What kind of things were you watching?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. Sebastian looked down, clearly ashamed. "Videos, on the phone." It started as curiosity because the kids at school talked about it and I didn't want to feel excluded. But then I couldn't stop. They made me feel things I didn't understand. And one night, when Vale came to my room because she had a nightmare, he couldn't continue. Tears choked his words, and I felt like I was choking along with him. Everything began to make sense in a horrible way. In recent months, Sebastian had been more reserved, more irritable, spending more time locked in his room with his phone. We had assumed it was normal, that it was a teenage thing, that all boys his age were like that. We never thought to check what he was doing. We never had that awkward but necessary conversation about sexuality, about boundaries, about what is appropriate and what is not. We had failed. As parents, we had failed monumentally. "Sebastian," I said, taking his hand in mine, "what you did was wrong, very wrong, and there will be consequences, and it will be a long and difficult road for everyone. But you are also a child who was confused, and who did not receive the guidance he needed, and that is also our responsibility." He looked at me with a mixture of disbelief and hope. "Do you forgive me?" It was a question loaded with so much weight, I felt it could crush me. Did I forgive him? Could I forgive something like that? Did I even have the right to forgive when I was not the direct victim? Forgiveness is a process, son, I responded honestly. I can't promise you things will go back to how they were before because they won't. But I can promise you I won't abandon you, that we will seek help together, that we will get through this somehow. That night, for the first time since the nightmare began, Sebastian fell asleep while I stroked his hair, just like when he was little. And for the first time, I felt a tiny ray of hope piercing the darkness. But hope, in moments like this, is a luxury you cannot afford for long. The following months were an emotional roller coaster. Family therapy sessions were exhausting, heartbreaking, and often ended with everyone crying. The psychologist, a woman named Dr. Morales who seemed to have infinite patience, guided us through conversations that none of us wanted to have but desperately needed. We learned things about our family that deeply shamed us. Daniel and I had been so focused on our careers, on paying the mortgage, on maintaining the appearance of a perfect family, that we had neglected the most important thing, real communication with our children. Sebastian had spent years feeling invisible, seeking connection in the wrong places. Valentina, for her part, had developed an alarming ability to hide her pain with fake smiles. "You are not bad parents," Dr. Morales told us in one of our sessions. "You are imperfect parents, like all parents in the world. The difference is that you are facing the consequences of your mistakes directly, which is painful but also an opportunity for real change." Those words gave me some comfort on the nights when I couldn't sleep, which was almost all of them. I would get up at 3 in the morning, walk through the silent house, and look at the family photographs adorning the walls. Photos of birthdays, beach vacations, Christmases by the tree. In each of those photos I saw happiness. But now I wondered how much of that happiness was real, and how much was a facade we had all unconsciously built. The relationship between Sebastian and Valentina was of course the most delicate aspect of everything. Following the specialist's recommendations, we maintained constant supervision of their interactions. They were never again alone in the same room. There was never again a closed door when both were home. It was exhausting. It was invasive. But it was necessary. Valentina, surprisingly, was the one who showed the most resilience. Children have a capacity for adaptation that we sometimes underestimate. With the support of her therapist, she began to process what she had experienced in a way that amazed me. One day, after a particularly intense session, she looked at me with those large brown eyes she had inherited from Daniel, and said something I will never forget. "Mommy, can I ask you a question?" "Of course, my love. Anything you want." "Does Sebastian love me?" The question hit me with the force of a tsunami. How do you explain to an 8-year-old girl that love and harm can coexist? How do you make her understand that her brother who had hurt her also genuinely loved her? "Yes, my darling," I responded, choosing each word carefully. "Sebastian loves you very much. But sometimes people who love us can hurt us without meaning to. That doesn't mean the love isn't real. It just means that people are complicated, and sometimes we do bad things even if we aren't bad people." She nodded slowly, processing my words with that seriousness children sometimes show when facing difficult truths. "And do I have to forgive him?" "You don't have to do anything you don't want to, Vale. Forgiveness is something very personal, and only you can decide if and when you are ready for that. But forgiving doesn't mean forgetting, and it doesn't mean what happened was okay. It just means you choose not to carry the anger forever." That conversation marked a turning point. Valentina, with her childish wisdom, had understood something I was only just beginning to comprehend, that healing was not a destination but a journey, and that each of us would have to walk it at our own pace. The scandal, as expected, was not long in breaking out. In a town of 12,000 inhabitants, secrets are common currency. Someone at the social services department talked. Or perhaps it was some parent from Valentina's school who connected the dots. I don't know and probably never will. What I know is that, overnight, we went from being the Mendoza family, respected members of the community, to being the town's pariahs. The whispers began at the supermarket, the sidelong glances at church, the invitations to social events that stopped coming, the WhatsApp messages left unanswered. One by one, the people we had considered friends disappeared from our lives, as if we had a contagious disease. Daniel took it especially hard. His job as manager of the local bank branch depended largely on his reputation, and that reputation was now irreparably tarnished. He began to drink more than he should, coming home late, with whiskey on his breath and reddened eyes. "I can't take it anymore," he told me one night, after emptying half a bottle in front of the television. "People look at me like I'm a monster, like I taught Sebastian to do what he did, like it's my fault." "It is our fault in part," I responded, and the words hurt as they left my mouth. "Not directly, but we failed. We weren't attentive. We didn't talk about what we needed to talk about." Daniel looked at me with a fury that froze my blood. "Now you're going to blame me? Am I the bad guy because I worked 12-hour days so you all could have everything you needed?" "I'm not saying that." "Yes, you are," he shouted, standing up so abruptly he knocked over the bottle. "Since all this started, you've done nothing but look at me with that reproachful face, as if I were the only one responsible, as if you weren't there too." The argument escalated to places I didn't know we could reach. We said horrible things, unforgivable things, things that revealed resentments we had accumulated over years of marriage. That night, Daniel didn't sleep in the guest room. He slept in his car, parked in front of the house like a stranger. The next morning when the children asked about him, I told them he had to go to work early. It was the first of many lies I would tell them in the following months. White lies designed to protect them from the most painful truth of all, that their family was falling apart. The breaking point came 3 months after the day they knocked on my door. It was a Sunday afternoon, one of those gray winter Sundays when the sky looks like a dirty sheet and the cold seeps into your bones. The 4 of us were in the living room, a scene that hadn't happened in months. Daniel had stopped drinking, or at least drastically reduced his consumption, and we had started couples therapy in addition to family therapy. Things weren't okay, but they were better. Or so we thought. Valentina was drawing at the dining table. Sebastian was reading a book on the sofa, meters away from his sister but visible to everyone. Daniel and I were reviewing the month's bills, trying to juggle a budget that had become increasingly tight since he lost his job. Yes, he had been fired. Corporate restructuring, they said officially, but we all knew the real reason. The bank didn't want the shadow of our family scandal to fall on its public image. Suddenly, Valentina looked up from her drawing and said something that paralyzed us all. "Sebastian, can you teach me how to draw a horse? Mine always look ugly." The silence that followed was deafening. The 4 of us exchanged looks, each trying to decipher the other's expressions. It was the first time since the incident that Valentina had directly asked her brother for something, the first time she had shown any kind of voluntary approach. Sebastian looked at me, seeking permission, and in his eyes I saw something I hadn't seen in months: hope. I nodded slowly. He got up from the sofa with caution, as if walking on glass, and approached the dining table. He kept a prudent distance, as he had been taught in therapy, but leaned in enough to see his sister's drawing. "Look, the trick is in the legs," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "If you make them a little curved here, they look more real." Daniel and I watched the scene holding our breath. It was such a small moment, so insignificant in appearance, but for us it was monumental. It was the first stone in a bridge we had believed destroyed forever. That night, after the children were asleep, Daniel and I sat on the back porch, wrapped in blankets against the cold. The sky was clear for the first time in weeks, and the stars shone with a clarity that seemed unreal. "Do you think we'll make it?" asked Daniel, and his voice sounded vulnerable in a way he rarely showed. "Do you think we can be a family again?" It was a question I also constantly asked myself. Could we go back to what we were? No, that was impossible. What we were before was dead, buried under layers of pain, shame, and uncovered secrets. But perhaps, just perhaps, we could build something new, something different, but not necessarily worse. "I don't know," I answered honestly, "but I think it's worth trying." Daniel took my hand in the darkness, and for the first time in a long time I didn't let go. 1 year after the day that changed everything, things had changed in ways I could never have predicted. We moved. We left behind the town where we had built our lives for over a decade and settled in a city 300 kilometers away. It was painful to leave everything known, but it was also liberating. In our new home, no one knew our story. We were simply the Mendozas, the family that had just moved to the block. Sebastian turned 15 in our new house. He continued attending weekly therapy, and his psychologist's reports were encouraging. He had developed control mechanisms, had processed much of the guilt, and had learned to talk about his emotions in ways that would have seemed impossible before. Therapy saved his life, Dr. Morales told me in our last session before the move. And you did too. Many parents in your situation abandon their children, send them away, discard them as damaged. You chose to stay. You chose to fight. That will make a difference in who Sebastian becomes as an adult. Valentina also blossomed in unexpected ways. Her new school had an art program she was passionate about, and she found in painting a way to express emotions that words could not capture. Her paintings, full of vibrant colors and abstract shapes, began to gain recognition in local competitions. One day, while helping her mount one of her works for a school exhibition, she pointed out a detail I hadn't noticed before. "See this, Mommy?" she asked, indicating a section of the painting where dark tones gradually mixed with lighter colors. "My teacher says it represents transition, that it shows how things can go from darkness to light." I looked at her, amazed at the depth of my 9-year-old daughter. "Is that what it means to you?" She nodded slowly. "It's like us. At first everything was dark and ugly and scary, but now there are more colors. There are still dark parts, but they don't take up all the space anymore." I hugged my daughter so tightly I probably cut off her breath, but she didn't complain. She just hugged me back with the same intensity. "I love you, Vale," I whispered against her hair. "I love you too, Mommy, and I love Daddy. And," she paused as if gathering courage, "and I love Sebastian, even though sometimes it's hard." Those words were, perhaps, the most precious gift I received in all that time. My daughter's forgiveness, fragile and partial but genuine, was more than I had dared to hope for. I don't want you to think everything was easy after that. It wasn't. There were relapses. There were nights of crying. There were moments when Daniel and I were on the verge of giving up on each other. There were days when Sebastian would close in on himself again, consumed by a shame that would probably accompany him for life. There were moments when Valentina showed signs of anxiety that required immediate attention. Healing, I learned, is not an event but a process. It is an endless series of small steps forward and occasional stumbles backward. It is learning to live with scars that will never completely disappear, but that can stop hurting over time. 2 years after that March 23rd that divided my life in two, I found myself sitting in the living room of our new house, surrounded by boxes we still hadn't finished unpacking. Daniel was in the kitchen making dinner. An activity he had discovered helped him relax after work. Sebastian was doing homework at the dining table, listening to music with his headphones. Valentina was watching cartoons on the television, lying on her stomach on the carpet. It was an everyday scene, ordinary, almost boring, and yet, for me, it was extraordinary, because we had gotten there. We had gone through hell and come out the other side, bruised but alive, separated but together somehow. My phone vibrated with a message from Dr. Morales, our former therapist. "Camila, how is everyone? Remember, I'm always here if you need anything." I smiled as I typed the reply. "We're okay, doctor. Better than I expected. Thank you for everything." It was true. We were okay. Not perfect, not like before, but okay. And at that moment, okay was more than enough. There is a lesson I learned from all this. A lesson I would like to share with anyone going through something similar or who fears it could happen to them. Silence is the enemy. Silence about sexuality, about boundaries, about the dangers of the internet, about the emotions teenagers experience and don't know how to handle. Silence between parents and children, between spouses, between siblings, the silence that creates voids filled with confusion, shame, and terrible decisions that cannot be undone. If I could go back, I would talk more. I would ask more. I would listen more. I wouldn't assume my children were okay, just because they showed no obvious signs to the contrary. I wouldn't let the discomfort of certain conversations keep me from having them. But I can't go back. None of us can. The only thing we can do is move forward, carrying our mistakes, but also our lessons, hoping that the road ahead is a little less dark than the one we left behind. The other day, while going through old photographs in the attic of our new house, I found an image I had forgotten existed. It was from about 6 years ago on a family beach vacation. Sebastian was 8, and Valentina was just 2. In the photo, he was holding her in his arms while she slept, with an expression of such pure tenderness it broke my heart. I stared at that image for a long time, feeling a whirlwind of emotions I couldn't name. Pain for what had been lost, guilt for what we didn't prevent, but also, surprisingly, hope. Because the boy in that photo, that boy who looked at his sister with so much love, still existed. He was buried under layers of trauma and shame, but he was still there, and with help, with time, with unconditional love, perhaps he could emerge again. I went downstairs with the photo in my hand and put it in a frame, placing it on the mantelpiece alongside the others. Valentina saw it first. "Look, Siba," she exclaimed. "You were so little, and I was a baby." Sebastian approached cautiously, looking at the image with an unreadable expression. "Yeah," he finally said, and his voice sounded hoarse. "We were very little." They exchanged a look that lasted barely a second, but which contained years of history, of pain, of resentment, and also perhaps of incipient forgiveness. Can I tell you something, Vale?" asked Sebastian, and I saw his hands trembling. Valentina looked at him with those large, wise eyes she had, those eyes that had seen too much for her age. "Sure. I'm so sorry for what I did to you," he said, and the words came out rushed, as if he had kept them for too long. "I know I've said it before, but I want you to know I'm truly sorry, every day, and that I'm working very hard to be better, to be the brother I should have been from the start." The silence that followed was dense, loaded with meaning. Valentina didn't respond immediately. Instead, she walked slowly toward her brother, and to everyone's surprise, hugged him. It was a brief hug, almost tentative, but it was a hug, the first in over 2 years. "I know, Siba," she said. "I'm working on that too." Daniel and I watched the scene from the other side of the living room, holding hands, with tears falling silently down our cheeks. It wasn't the end of our journey. There would probably never be a definitive end, a moment when we could say we are healed and move on without looking back. But it was a step, a small, beautiful, painful step towards something that vaguely resembled hope. If you are reading this and feel identified, if you have lived through something similar, or fear it could happen to you, I want to leave you with some final words. First, seek help. Don't try to handle this alone. There are trained professionals who have seen cases like yours, and who can guide you through this dark labyrinth. You don't have to have all the answers. You don't have to be perfect. You just have to take the first step. Second, don't abandon your children. Neither the one who was the victim nor the one who was the perpetrator. They both need you, though in different ways. The temptation to walk away, to pretend it's not happening, to blame and punish without understanding, is enormous. Resist it. Punishment without rehabilitation heals nothing. It only buries the pain so it can resurface later, bigger and more destructive. Third, take care of your own well-being. You cannot save your family if you destroy yourself in the process. Seek your own therapy. Find your own support system. Allow yourself to feel everything you need to feel, the pain, the rage, the guilt, the shame. But don't get stuck in those emotions. Go through them to reach the other side. And finally, don't lose hope. I know it sounds impossible. I know that when you are in the deepest darkness, hope seems like a cruel fantasy, but it exists. I promise you, it's there, waiting for you to find it, in the small moments of connection, in the unexpected laughter, in the tentative hugs, in the sincere I'm sorries and the gradual I forgive you. Our story is not over. It probably never will be, not really, but we have learned to live with it. We have learned to carry our scars with dignity, to turn our pain into lessons, to transform our tragedy into an opportunity for growth. 3 years ago, 3 knocks on my door destroyed everything I thought I knew about my family. Today, sitting in this living room surrounded by the people I love most in the world, I know that destruction, as horrible as it was also the beginning of something new, something more honest, something more real. Because sometimes things have to break completely so we can rebuild them in a better way. And that, though it hurts to admit it, is exactly what happened to us. This story is based on real experiences faced by thousands of families each year. If you or someone you know is going through a similar situation, remember you are not alone, and help is available. Prevention begins with open communication, responsible supervision of internet access, and age-appropriate sexual education. Don't wait until it's too late to have these difficult conversations. Your family will thank you.